The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Sara Quinn arrived at Camp Iron. She came alone, no escort, no welcome party, just a government-issued duffel bag over her left shoulder, a pair of boots that had seen better assignments, in a transfer order folded twice in her breast pocket. The kind of fold you make when you have read something so many times you have memorized it but cannot stop reading it anyway. The gate was locked. A laminated card zip-tied to the iron bars told her to report to Processing Building 4 between 0600 and 0800. She checked her watch, 0547. She set the duffel down and waited. The Nevada desert in early morning smells like cold metal and dry earth and something ancient underneath both of those things. Sara had grown up in upstate New York where mornings smelled like pine and mud and someone's wood stove down the road. This was nothing like that. This was a place designed to strip things away. She looked through the gate. Camp Iron spread across a shallow basin between two ridgelines, maybe 40 acres of low concrete buildings, training fields, obstacle courses, and a long rectangular structure she recognized as a combat hangar. Everything was the color of sand. Everything looked permanent in the way that things built quickly always try to look permanent. She had read the facility report during the flight from Washington. Built in 2009, expanded twice. Current capacity 112 trainees per cycle. Officially designated as an advanced combat readiness selection program. The kind of place where the military sent people it wanted to become something harder than what they already were. Or the kind of place it sent people it wanted to forget about for a while. Sara knew which category she was in. A guard emerged from the booth at 0553, looked at her transfer papers, looked at her face, looked at the papers again. He said nothing unfriendly. He said nothing at all. He opened the gate, handed her a base map with Building 4 circled in red ink, and went back inside. She picked up her duffel and walked through. Processing took 11 minutes. A corporal with a clipboard checked her name against a roster, issued her a room assignment and a training schedule, and pointed down a corridor without making eye contact. Sara followed the point. Her room was at the end of a long barracks hallway that smelled of industrial, floor cleaner, and old sweat. 8 bunks, 4 to a wall. 2 were already occupied by sleeping shapes. She took the nearest empty bunk, set her duffel underneath it, and sat on the edge of the mattress. She did not unpack. Instead, she reached into the front pocket of her jacket and took out a watch. It was old. Not antique old, not collector old, just worn old. The kind of worn that comes from years of daily use and not enough care. The leather band was cracked at the middle hole. The crystal had a hairline scratch running from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. The face was plain white with black numerals, nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make you look twice if you saw it lying on a table, unless you turned it over. On the back, scratched deep into the case metal in uneven letters that suggested they had been put there with something improvised rather than a proper engraving tool, were 2 initials. DW. Sara held the watch for a moment. Then she set it carefully on the small shelf above the bunk and lay down without removing her boots. She did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the bass wake up around her, distant footsteps, a door opening somewhere, the low diesel sound of a vehicle crossing the yard. Somewhere outside, a bird she did not recognize called twice and went silent. At 0630, she rose, washed her face with cold water, pressed her uniform with her hands, and tied her hair back in a tight bun. She checked the training schedule. Breakfast at 0645, formation at 0730, assessment drills at 0800. She picked up the watch, held it for one breath, and put it in her pocket. Then she went to breakfast. The mess hall held maybe 60 people at capacity. At 0645, it held 32. She knew it was 32 because she counted them before she reached the food line. In her previous work, the first thing you did when you walked into any room was count the people in it. The second thing was identify the exits. The third was figure out who held the most social gravity in the space, because that person was almost always the most important variable. She got her tray, eggs, toast, black coffee. She found a table near the far wall, facing the room with a clear line of sight to both doors. She sat down and began to eat, and she read the room. 32 people, a rough split between those who had been here long enough to have routines and those who were still navigating. The ones with routines moved toward their seats without looking, the way furniture becomes invisible once you have walked around it enough times. The newer ones were slower, more deliberate, still measuring everything. She had been watching for 4 minutes when the door opened. Nothing announced it. The door opened and closed behind people all morning. But something in the room changed, not loudly, not dramatically. More like the difference between a room with a window open and a room with the window shut. A shift in pressure, collective and unconscious. Dex Mercer was 30 years old, though he carried himself with the ease of someone who had never once felt his age as a limitation. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a face that would have been handsome if it were not so accustomed to being looked at. He was followed by two others. One with a loose grin that looked painted on like it had been there so long it had forgotten how to leave. One who walked slightly behind the other two, watching everything with careful, calibrating eyes. They moved through the mess hall, and the room arranged itself around them. Not dramatically. No one jumped up. No chairs scraped back. But Sara watched closely enough to see the micro-adjustments. A conversation lowered half a register. Someone who had been about to stand thought better of it and stayed seated. Dex did not do anything to cause this. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a gesture. He simply walked through the room, and the room responded the way water responds to something dropped into it before the surface has had time to settle. He got his tray. He turned from the line. His eyes moved across the room in a single practice sweep and stopped on Sara. She was looking directly at him when they did. She did not look away. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then the corner of his mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile, and he walked to his table. Sara looked back down at her eggs. She filed everything away. The 3 seconds, the thing that was not quite a smile. The way Rye Stafford, the one with the painted grin, had watched her during those 3 seconds with the attentiveness of someone waiting to see which way a ball would roll. And Nash Briggs, the careful one, who had looked at her with eyes that were already running calculations. She drank her coffee. She was going to need to understand this place before this place decided it understood her. Formation at 0730 was in the main yard, a flat stretch of compacted dirt between the barracks and the training hangar. Sara stood in line with the others and watched Master Chief Wade Pratt walk out from the operations building. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, not tall, compact in the way that some men get compact with age, not thinner but denser, like weight redistributed by decades of use into something more efficient. His face carried the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that most of what happened around him required observation before response. He wore no expression as he walked, not hardness, not coldness. Neutrality, the way a tool is neutral before you pick it up. He stopped in front of the formation and looked along the line. His eyes reached Sara and stayed there for exactly half a second longer than they stayed on anyone else. Then they moved on. He began to speak. The schedule for the day, the objectives for the assessment drills, the standards expected. His voice was level and unhurried, the kind of voice that had been telling people what to do for so long, it no longer needed volume to carry authority. Sara listened. But she was also turning over that half second. She was good at half seconds. The morning drills moved in sequence, running first 2 miles on the track that circled the obstacle field, then rope climbs, then a weighted carry course that wound between concrete barriers in a pattern designed to disorient. Sara moved through each station steadily, not at the top of the group, not at the bottom. She found the pace her body could hold across a full day, rather than exhausting itself in the first hour, which was what most people did when they were trying to prove something early. She was not trying to prove anything yet. She was still reading. Dex Mercer finished the rope climb 8 seconds before anyone else. He made sure everyone saw it, not by celebrating, but by standing at the base of the rope with his arms crossed and watching the others come down with an expression that was perfectly neutral, which was somehow more pointed than contempt would have been. Rye Stafford and Nash Briggs followed close behind, running in his wake the way smaller boats run. In the wake of a larger one, the water already disturbed, so the work is easier. During the water break between stations, Sara stood near the barracks wall. She drank slowly. She breathed slowly. She had learned in her previous work that showing fatigue was a form of information disclosure, and information you gave away for free was information you could no longer control. 3 shadows crossed the wall. She did not need to look up. You transfer from an intel unit, Dex said, not a question, a fact presented like a verdict. She capped her bottle and turned to face him. That's right. Intel. He said the word the way someone might say the name of a subject they had dropped in the 2nd semester of college. Paper pusher. Analyst, she said. Rye Stafford grinned. Nash Briggs watched her with those careful eyes. You know what we do out here, analyst? Dex asked. The schedule said assessment drills. Just finished the rope climb. Carry course next. She glanced at her watch. We have about 4 minutes. Something moved behind his eyes, not anger exactly, something more like recalculation. He had expected a different response, and she had not given it to him. Before he could continue, Master Chief Pratt's whistle cut across the yard. Short, sharp final. Sara walked toward the carry course without waiting. She heard Stafford's voice behind her, low, but not low enough. She thinks she's something. She did not look back. She was not something yet. She was just here. And being here was already more complicated than the transfer order made it sound. That evening in the barracks, Sara allowed herself to think about the things she had been keeping in the forward compartment of her mind all day. The things filed under later, after the work is done. 8 months. That was how long it had been since the report landed on her desk. She had been working in the analytical division for 16 months at the time, processing field data from domestic training operations. Most of what came across her desk was routine. Performance metrics, incident logs, medical reports, the paperwork of an institution maintaining itself. The report about the training accident at Fort Carver, Georgia, had looked routine at first. A trainee had suffered a severe head injury during a combative session. The official report classified it as accidental contact in excess of drill parameters. The supervising instructor had been given a formal warning. The trainee had been medically separated. Case closed. Sara had read it in 40 minutes. Then she had read it again. The medical timeline did not match the incident report. The injury described in the hospital records was inconsistent with a single accidental strike. 3 witness statements had been collected within the same 2-hour window and contained phrases so similar they could not plausibly have come from separate individuals recalling an event from their own perspectives. She had flagged it. Her supervisor had looked at the flag and looked at her and said one word. Careful, not wrong, not right, just careful. She had thought about it for 48 hours. Then she had declined to sign the forwarding approval. David Wren had found her the next morning in the break room. He was 31 years old and had been with the division for 4 years. He had a dry humor he deployed sparingly, which made it more effective, and a habit of leaving half-full coffee cups on every horizontal surface within reach. She had liked him the way you like people you work alongside long enough that their habits become part of your sense of a normal day. He looked at her across the coffee machine and said, "I heard you didn't sign the Carver report." "I didn't." He poured his coffee. "I'll sign it. You've got enough heat already from the Brennan review." She had started to tell him not to. She had formed the first word of the sentence in her mind. She had not said it fast enough. He signed the report that afternoon. 6 days later, his car left a highway overpass outside Arlington at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night with no mechanical failure and no weather conditions that explain why a careful, sober man with no history of reckless driving would drift across 2 lanes and through a guardrail. The investigation lasted 9 days. Accident, the report said. Sara had read that report too. 3 weeks later, she received her transfer order to Camp Iron, Nevada. Advanced Combat Readiness Selection. Effective immediately. She had not fought the transfer. She had packed one bag and the watch that David Wren's sister had pressed into her hands at the memorial without explanation, except for a voice very quiet saying, "He would have wanted you to have this." Sara did not know why. She still did not know why, but she had taken it. She carried it every day. She reached up to the shelf above her bunk and looked at the watch where it sat in the dim barracks light. DW. She had not come to Camp Iron to disappear. She had not come because a transfer order told her to. She had come because whatever was in that Carver report, whatever David Wren had signed his name to, whatever invisible line she had come too close to, the answer was not in Washington. The answer was in a system she had not seen from the inside yet. Camp Iron was as inside as she had ever gotten. She was going to use that. But first she had to survive long enough to be useful. What Sara did not know and would not know for some time was that Master Chief Wade Pratt had known her name for 3 weeks before she arrived. It had come to him sideways, attached to something else mentioned almost incidentally in the way that things most worth paying attention to are often mentioned. A colleague at a different installation had sent him a personnel update routine cycle administration, and buried in the attachments was a transfer authorization with Sara Quinn's name on it. Pratt had almost moved past it, but something made him stop. He had pulled her file. NSA Analytical Division. 4 commendations in 16 months. A supervisory note from 8 months ago that read in language so sanitized it required translation that the analyst in question had demonstrated an unwillingness to conform to established documentation protocols in sensitive situations. Unwillingness to conform to established documentation protocols. Pratt had been in the military long enough to know exactly what that sentence meant. He had set the file down and looked at his office wall for a while. On the wall was a photograph. 12 men in desert kit somewhere that had been hot and flat and very far from Nevada. He was in the photograph. 4 of the 12 were no longer alive. 1 had left the military. He knew why. He had placed the file in the locked drawer at the bottom of his desk, which he had not opened in 7 months, and where there was already one other document he had been unable to throw away and unable to act on. He was still trying to decide what to do about that document when Sara Quinn arrived at his gate at 05:47 on a Tuesday morning. He had watched her walk through the first formation, watched her on the rope, watched her during the water break, the way she stood at that wall and controlled her breathing and gave nothing away. 31 years of reading people in uniform had made him fluent in what bodies said when their owners believed no one was paying attention. What he read in Sara Quinn's posture was not fear. It was not bravado. It was something rarer and more uncomfortable. It was patience with a destination. Cole Harmon arrived at Camp Iron at 1400 that first day. He came in a standard-issue vehicle with a standard-issue travel authorization for what was officially classified as a routine observation rotation. Lieutenant Harmon visited multiple installations throughout the year. He wrote assessment reports. He made recommendations. He was not the most senior SEAL on the East Coast, not the most decorated, not the most visible. He was something quieter than any of those things. He was the one they sent when something needed to be looked at carefully by someone whose judgment was trusted completely and whose presence raised no flags. He signed in at the operations building, exchanged a few words with Pratt, who he had met twice before, both times at installations that were later reviewed for procedural irregularities. He noticed Pratt noticed that fact. Neither of them said anything about it. That evening, he sat in the corner of the mess hall and ate alone and watched the room with a patience that had no performance in it. Just the long, quiet attention of a man who had learned that most of what mattered happened in the spaces between the obvious moments. He noticed the arrangement around Dex Mercer. He had seen similar formations in other places. The particular social physics of power that does not need to announce itself because everyone already knows it is there. He noticed Sara Quinn against the far wall eating and reading the room at the same time and recognized the kind of stillness she carried. Not trained stillness, earned stillness. The kind that develops when a person has learned that panic costs more than it is worth. He finished his meal. He went to his billet. Tomorrow would be an assessment day. He would observe. He would take notes. That was the part that was on paper. The next morning, the schedule listed combatives assessment for 0900. Sara read it over breakfast with the particular calm that comes not from the absence of awareness, but from complete acceptance of what the awareness is telling you. She had known this was coming. She went to the hangar at 0855, found a space near the equipment wall, wrapped her hands. She had trained 3 years in Krav Maga before the NSA not to become a fighter, and she had never particularly wanted to fight, but because there had been a period in her mid-20s when the world had felt very large and very indifferent, and she had needed to feel competent inside her own body. The training had given her that. It had also incidentally made her genuinely difficult to hit cleanly. The trainees filed in. Sara watched the door. Cole Harmon entered at 0858 and took a chair in the observer section along the wall. He opened a small notebook but did not write anything yet. Master Chief Pratt called the session to order. He explained the parameters. Training contact only, controlled force, protective equipment mandatory. Any trainee who escalated beyond assessed parameters would be removed from the session immediately. He looked at the group when he said this. He did not look at Dex Mercer specifically. Sara noticed that he looked slightly away from him. Pairs were called. Sara heard her name called fifth. Quinn, Mercer. A sound moved through the trainees, almost inaudible. The collective breath of a room that understands what it is about to watch. Sara stepped onto the mat. Dex Mercer stepped onto the mat. He was a head taller and 50 pounds heavier, and he moved well. She could see that immediately. The particular economy of motion of someone trained properly and trained long. He rolled his neck, once shook out his hands, looked at her with an expression that might have passed for neutral in a photograph, but was not neutral in person. She checked her footing, loosened her knees, brought her hands up in a guard that was compact and lower than most people expected, because most people expected a high guard from someone her size. The whistle blew. He came fast, faster than the exercise required. She rolled left off his first advance and let the momentum carry her clear. His second strike was a shoulder check aimed at her center of gravity. She stepped inside it, redirected his arm at the elbow, and scored a clean point to his ribs with her forearm before breaking back to distance. The room went quiet. Dex reset. Something around his eyes had gone sharper. He had not expected that, and he was recalculating. People who are not accustomed to being surprised usually recalculated in one of two directions, respect or escalation. She saw which direction he chose before he moved. His third advance carried more weight, still within training parameters technically, but only technically. She dodged the primary strike, but his follow-through caught her on the back step when her weight was wrong and her foot was not set. She stumbled. He smelled the give. What happened next was very fast. He closed the distance before she had fully reset. The punch that connected with her jaw was not a training strike. It had full rotation behind it, full extension, the kind of force a man his size generates when he has stopped observing the rules of the context he is in. Her vision flashed white. Her legs went unreliable beneath her. She was still trying to find the floor when the second strike landed at her temple. The world tilted. Then it went away entirely. She did not feel herself fall. She became aware of the floor first, the specific texture of training mat pressed against her cheek. Then sound came back in pieces. Voices, multiple voices, one sharp and close saying her name. Then a rushing clarity as everything sharpened at once. And then a sound she would think about afterward. A single set of footsteps crossing the floor with purpose. Then a grip closing around someone's wrist. And a voice very quiet that cut through the noise in the room the way a clean edge cuts through everything around it. Step back. She did not see what happened next. She was still finding her way back to the room, but she felt the stillness that followed. The total absolute stillness of a space where every person in it has understood that something fundamental has shifted. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at the ceiling of the training hangar. Kneeling beside her, 2 fingers at her pulse point, was a man she had not yet spoken to. He checked the back of her head. Methodical. Quick, but not careless. She's breathing. Pulse is steady. He said this to the room. Then he looked at her directly. Don't sit up yet. She did not have an immediate argument for that which told her something about her current condition. Several feet away, Dex Mercer was on one knee, not by choice. Because he had been placed there by a grip he could not break. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he did not plan to go. Pratt stood to the side. He was not doing anything. He was standing with his hands at his waist and his face set in an expression that Sara, even in her unsteady state, registered and filed for later. The man beside her looked at her with eyes that gave nothing away except complete attention. What's your name? He said. Quinn, Sara Quinn. Do you know where you are? Training hangar, Camp Iron, Nevada. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly. Good enough. On the mat between them, something caught the overhead light. The watch had come out of her pocket when she fell. It lay face down and the initials on the back caught the fluorescent light in a way that made them sharper than they had any right to be. DW, he saw it. He did not reach for it. He did not ask about it. He looked at it for 1 second and then looked back at her. And Sara Quinn looked up at the ceiling of the hangar and thought with a clarity that surprised her, I am exactly where I need to be. Even if it took hitting the floor to get here. The medics arrived 4 minutes after Sara hit the floor. She had been counting, not deliberately. Counting was something her mind did in the absence of other instructions, the way a clock keeps time, whether anyone is watching it or not. 4 minutes from the moment Cole Harmon knelt beside her to the moment 2 medics came through the hangar side door with a stretcher between them. She did not get on the stretcher. She sat up slowly with Harmon's hand at her shoulder, not pushing but present, and she took stock of herself the way she had been taught in field preparation, starting at the top and moving down. Vision clear, ringing in her left ear, dropping to a manageable frequency. Pain at her jaw and at her temple, 2 distinct points, and when she reached up and touched the temple, she felt the beginning of swelling, but no give in the bone beneath it. She stood. The medics told her to stay seated. She thanked them and stood anyway. What she saw when she straightened up and faced the room was something she would spend considerable time thinking about in the days that followed. Every trainee in the hangar was looking at her, not at Dex Mercer still on his knees across the mat, not at Harmon, who remained near her with a stillness that occupied space the way a large piece of furniture does felt even when you are not looking directly at it. Not at Pratt, who stood to the side with his hands at his waist and his face set in an expression Sara now understood was not neutrality, but something more costly than that. They were looking at her. She straightened her uniform with both hands. She did not touch her face. She looked across the mat at Dex Mercer, who was now looking at the floor, and then at Pratt, and then she said to no one in particular, I'm ready to continue. Pratt said, session is done, dismissed. She walked out of the hangar under her own power. The infirmary was a low concrete room at the back of the medical building with 4 beds, a supply cabinet, and a window that looked out onto the side yard where the fuel vehicles parked. A medic named Castillo, who had the manner of a man who had seen too many unnecessary injuries to be surprised by another, and not too many to stop caring about them, examined her with efficient hands. Mild concussion, he said. which I know you already know. Rest for the remainder of today. This conversation is being documented. I understand, Sarah said. The documentation part means someone is going to ask questions about how a training exercise produced a mild concussion. Yes, she said. I expect they will. Castillo gave her 2 ice packs wrapped in cloth and left her in the room with the window and the fuel vehicles. She lay on the bed. She closed her eyes. She listened to the building. She had learned in 16 months of analytical work that buildings talk when people inside them believe no one is paying attention. The sound of the main corridor came through the wall clearly enough, footsteps moving at different speeds. A phone ringing somewhere and cutting off abruptly. A door closing hard, the kind of close that happens when a person is trying to control something and does not quite manage it. 20 minutes after the door closed hard, she heard a voice. Down the corridor, partially muffled by the wall between them. She could not hear every word. Walls and distance and the particular acoustics of a concrete building where he worked against a clean signal. But she caught enough. The rhythm of it. The pauses. The emotional architecture underneath the words. Dex was talking to someone he expected to fix things. She knew this from the particular tone people use when calling in a resource they have always had access to. No uncertainty in it. The language of a person reporting a problem to a mechanism they trusted. She had heard this tone before in briefings where senior officials described corrections that needed making, as though correction were simply a matter of announcing the requirement. She heard the name once clearly. Mercer, his father. She heard the phrase above my authority and then clearly enough to be certain she had it right took it too far. He meant Cole Harmon had taken it too far. She lay in the infirmary bed with the ice pack at her temple, and she thought about what she had just understood. She had prepared herself for an administrative response. A report, a review, a recommendation. The clean paperwork language of institutional self-protection. What she understood now, listening to Dex through a concrete wall, was something she had known intellectually but not yet felt in the immediate specific way you feel something when it is directed at you. He genuinely did not believe he had done something wrong. Not as strategy, not as cover. He did not believe it because the word wrong had never been applied to the things he did in a way that stuck. It had been smoothed away each time by a voice on the other end of a phone, by a mechanism that existed specifically to ensure that the word wrong could never find permanent purchase on his life. She held this thought. Then the anger changed, not disappeared, reorganized, into something colder and more patient and more useful than anger had ever been on its own. She set the ice pack on the table. She sat up. She was going to need to be careful now. Not afraid, careful. She had spent a long time learning to know the difference. The door opened at 15:40. Wade Pratt stepped in and closed it behind him with both hands on the frame, the careful close of a man who wanted to be sure it was shut. He sat in the examination chair beside the bed. Under his arm, he carried a folder. Not thin, the kind that has been added to over time, pages accumulated rather than assembled all at once. He looked at the folder, then at her. I've been sitting on this for 8 months, he said, and I want you to know that before I give it to you, because I know what that sounds like and I cannot make it sound like anything else. Sarah said nothing. I told myself I was waiting for the right person, he said, the right situation, the set of circumstances that would make doing something about it not just the right thing, but the possible thing. He paused. I've been in this uniform long enough to know the difference between those two categories. He held the folder out to her. She took it. The first page was a memo. Internal NSA routing code at the top, dated 11 months ago. A preliminary assessment of training incident protocols at 3 installations, of which Fort Carver was one, compiled by an oversight committee that had never published its findings. She turned the page. A personnel action notice, dated 10 months ago, recommending the administrative separation of an unnamed junior instructor at Fort Carver, pending investigation of use of force compliance. The investigation, as far as she knew, had never happened. She turned more pages. She read carefully. The room was very quiet. Pratt did not speak while she read. He sat in the chair with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the window, and he waited with the patience of a man who had been practicing patience in the wrong direction for a long time and was trying now to practice it correctly. When she got to the final page, she stopped. A routing slip, the kind attached to documents when forwarded between offices for review and approval before external distribution. The document had been sent to a senior administrator. His name was on the approval chain. General Boyd Mercer. The document had been approved for internal review only. Distribution restricted. External release denied. Sara read the routing slip a second time. She looked at the date, 11 months ago, 4 months before the Carver incident report was filed. She lowered the folder to her lap and sat very still. He saw it before it happened, she said. Pratt's jaw tightened. He reviewed the preliminary assessment. He knew the pattern. He restricted the distribution. He paused. And 4 months later, when the Carver incident was reported and closed in 9 days with a formal warning and a separation, he was in the authorization chain for the closure. And David Wren, she said. Pratt looked at her directly then, for the first time since he had walked in. I don't have anything on Wren. I want to be clear about that. What I have is in that folder. But the timeline. Yes, he said, the timeline. She closed the folder. She thought about the weight of it, not in the legal sense, in the physical, immediate sense. The weight of a document that someone had kept for 8 months in a locked drawer because they needed to believe that holding it was worth something even when they did not know what to do with it. Why me, she said. Pratt looked back at the window. Because you didn't sign the report. Wren did. And I don't know if that is the reason for what happened to him. I genuinely do not know that, but I know you looked at the same information he looked at and you made a different choice. And then you ended up here. He paused. I have been in enough rooms to know that people do not end up at places like Camp Iron by accident. I need to make a call, she said. Pratt stood. Infirmary has a private line. Castillo does not monitor it. He moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said without turning back, I know what it costs to sit on that for 8 months. I need you to know that I know that. It does not change what I should have done sooner, but I needed you to know I know. He left. Sara sat with the folder in her lap and thought about the cost of sitting on things for 8 months and whether the understanding of that cost changed anything. She decided it changed one thing. It meant Pratt was done sitting, which meant she was not alone in this room anymore. Cole Harmon was waiting outside the infirmary when she came out at 16:20. He was standing against the exterior wall of the medical building with his arms loosely crossed and his face arranged in a state of rest that she was beginning to recognize as the specific expression he wore when paying extremely close attention. He had changed out of his observer's jacket and was in a plain duty shirt which made him look somehow more deliberate than his uniform had the way some people look more serious in civilian clothes. She stopped when she saw him. He looked at the folder under her arm, then at her face. Pratt, he said. Yes, she said. He nodded slowly. I've been placed on a review hold, pending explanation of my conduct during the training session. He said this without particular emotion. General Boyd Mercer's office contacted the base commander approximately 90 minutes ago. That was fast, Sara said. It was, he agreed. The question is which office I submit my written account to. She understood what he was asking without him asking it. He was telling her he was not going to move before she did, that this was her information, her situation, her decision about the next step. He was not going to take it over. He was standing here because he wanted her to know he was available, not because he had already decided the course of action. She appreciated that more than she could have explained at that moment. I need until tomorrow morning, she said. He uncrossed his arms. You'll have it. He started to move away. Harmon, she said. He stopped. The watch, the one that came out of my pocket on the mat. He reached into his breast pocket and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. You held on to it. It was on the floor, he said simply. Someone would have stepped on it. She took it from him, turned it over. The initials caught the late afternoon light. She was aware that he was watching her do this, and she was aware that he understood what it meant, not the specifics, not the name, but the category of meaning. He was a man who understood what it looked like to carry something that had belonged to someone who was no longer there. His name was David Wren, she said. She had not said his name out loud to another person since the memorial. He worked with me. He signed a document he should not have had to sign because I did not move fast enough to stop him. 7 days later, he was gone. She paused. The official report said accident. Cole Harmon did not say he was sorry. She was grateful for that. She had heard the word sorry from too many people who used it as a way of closing a subject they were uncomfortable keeping open. He said, You didn't put him in that car. She looked at the watch. I know that, she said. I know that is technically true. It is not technically true, he said. It is true. The thing about a sentence like that was not whether it was accurate. She had told herself the same thing in various forms over 8 months. But hearing it from another person in a quiet, unhurried voice, in the specific air of a Nevada afternoon, gave it a different texture than it had ever had inside her own head. She put the watch back in her pocket. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Tomorrow morning," he said. She walked back to the barracks. In the early evening, Rye Stafford found Nash Briggs near the equipment storage at the back of the training hangar. They stood together in the dimming light and spoke in low voices. Sarah watched from the window of the barracks common room, which offered a sufficient angle. Stafford spoke more. Briggs listened, and as he listened, his posture did something she recognized. He was creating distance. Not physical distance. Not yet. The internal kind. The kind that happens when a person realizes they have been standing next to a problem and needs to begin the process of not being associated with that problem. The shoulders angle fractionally away. The eyes stop meeting fully. The whole body begins without conscious decision to revise its relationship to proximity. She watched for 2 minutes and then looked away. What she did not see, because she was not in the corridor outside the communications room at 17:30, was Dex Mercer sitting with the phone in his hand after the call ended. He had spoken to his father for 14 minutes. He had described the situation using words like unreasonable and disproportionate, an outside officer, with no standing in the assessment process. His father had listened with the attention of a man for whom listening was a prelude to correcting. His father had said he would contact the base commander. He had said that Harmon's conduct would be reviewed through proper channels. He had said several other things in the language of institutional mechanics that Dex had heard all his life, and which had always resolved into the same outcome. The situation would be handled. He had ended the call expecting relief, the weight of the thing redistributed to someone more capable of carrying it. He sat with the phone in his hand. The relief did not come. What came instead was an image he could not move past. Sara Quinn standing up from a bed she had been told to stay in and saying, "I'm ready to continue." Not fighting back, not making a scene, just standing up. He sat in the corridor turning this over, trying to understand why the image would not leave. He did not yet have the vocabulary for what he was feeling when he looked at it. But it stayed with him the way certain images do when they have landed somewhere deeper than the conscious mind intended to let them go. His father was going to handle this. Dex put down the phone. He did not feel handled. That night, Sarah sat at the small desk in her room with the folder open in front of her and a sheet of paper beside it. The barracks were quiet. The base outside ran on its nighttime rhythms. She read through the folder again, not to find new information, but to understand the sequence, because the order in which things happened told you things the events themselves could not tell you. It told you about decisions, about what someone knew and when they knew it, about the space between awareness and action, which was where the real choices lived. General Boyd Mercer had seen the preliminary assessment 11 months ago. He had known the pattern. He had restricted the document. 4 months later, the Carver incident happened. The report was closed in 9 days. Sarah had flagged it. David Wren had signed it. David Wren was gone. Sarah was at Camp Iron. She sat with the sequence and thought about the shape of a system that could produce it without any single person necessarily believing they had done something wrong. A system where restricting a document was administrative caution, where closing a report quickly was operational efficiency, where transferring an analyst who asked the wrong questions was standard personnel management. She thought about Pratt, who had sat on this folder for 8 months and called it waiting. She thought about Dex Mercer, who had grown up inside a system that solved his problems so reliably he had never developed the capacity to understand when he was creating them. She thought about Cole Harmon standing outside the infirmary with a watch in his breast pocket, waiting to give it back rather than setting it on a table and walking away. She thought about David Wren, who had poured coffee and said the decent thing in the matter-of-fact way of a person who did not know it was the last significant choice he would make. She picked up the watch from the shelf. She had been carrying it as a form of debt, as evidence of something she owed that she could never fully repay. She was going to have to start carrying it differently, not as what she owed, as what she was going to do. She put the watch down and she picked up the sheet of paper and she began to write. In the careful, precise language she had spent 16 months developing, she set down a summary of the documents in the folder and their relevance to the events of the previous 8 months. Not a report, the shape of a report. The skeleton of the thing you build before you build the thing. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finished, she read it back, made 3 corrections, folded it inside the folder, and put the folder under her mattress. She lay down and closed her eyes. Outside, the Nevada desert did what it did at night, which was get very cold very quickly and very quiet in a way that felt almost like pressure. Tomorrow had requirements. She was going to meet them. She slept. The next morning, Dex Mercer's phone buzzed at 0610 with a text from Rye Stafford. Probably best we keep distance for a while. No explanation, no sorry. Just the arithmetic of association, the calculation that runs automatically when the powerful become a liability. Dex read it once, set the phone face down on the bunk beside him. Nash Briggs said nothing at all, which was somehow louder. Dex sat on the edge of his bunk and looked at the wall across from him and tried to locate the feeling he was supposed to have in a situation like this, the one his father's voice in his head had always supplied on cue. He could not find it. There was nothing where the voice usually was, just the wall and his own breathing and the so uncomfortable pressure of a consequence that had nowhere to go except toward him. He sat there for a long time. He did not call anyone. The alarm on Sarah's secondary watch went off at 5:15. She was already awake. She had been awake for 20 minutes, lying in the dark, listening to the bass shift from its nighttime rhythms into its morning ones. The fuel vehicles, the distant gate, footsteps in the corridor, purposeful rather than soft and uncertain. She reached over and silenced the alarm before it woke the others. She sat up and put her feet on the floor, and she did what she always did in the first minutes of a day when something significant was going to happen. She named the thing she was carrying, the folder under the mattress, the sequence that had not changed overnight, because sequences do not change, they only become clearer or murkier depending on your proximity to them. The weight of David Wren, which she had decided last night to carry differently. She named these things. She held them. She set them down in an orderly row, the way you lay tools out before beginning work. Then she stood up, made her bunk with military corners, washed her face with cold water, and pressed her uniform with her hands. She tied her hair back. She picked up the watch with DW on the back and put it in her left breast pocket where she could feel it against her ribs. She went to breakfast. The mess hall at 0620 held 19 people. She counted them before she reached the food line. She got her tray and chose her table and sat facing the room and ate without rushing. At 6:38, Dex Mercer came in. He was alone. Rye Stafford and Nash Briggs were not with him. She noticed this before she noticed anything else. The absence of his usual arrangement was information. He got his tray and stood at the end of the food line, and his eyes moved across the room in the familiar sweep. They found her. They stayed for a moment. She looked back without expression. He did not come toward her. He took a table closer to the door than he usually sat, which was also information, though she was not sure yet what kind. She finished her breakfast and walked out into the cold Nevada morning. Formation was at 0730. Sarah stood in line and felt the cold air on her face and looked straight ahead. She was aware of Dex Mercer taking his position at the far end of the line. She was aware of Rye Stafford and Nash Briggs arriving separately, positioning themselves in a part of the formation not adjacent to Dex. She was aware of Cole Harmon standing at the edge of the yard near the operations building entrance, watching the formation with his focused stillness. And she was aware of Master Chief Pratt walking out 1 minute earlier than his usual time. He stopped in front of the formation. He gave the schedule, the objectives, the performance standards in the same level voice. Then he said one additional thing. Formation holds after drills at 1100. Attendance mandatory for all personnel. He dismissed them to the morning drills. She ran the 2-mile track faster than any previous morning. Not dramatically faster. Not enough to announce itself. But she could feel the difference in her legs, which were working with a kind of energy she had allowed herself just enough of it, just enough to add half a gear without tipping into the zone where emotion becomes the thing running you instead of the other way around. She finished the track and went directly to the rope and climbed it twice without stopping at the top. On the second descent, she felt a strain in her left shoulder where it had taken the most impact, but it was manageable, and she managed it. She moved through the rest of the morning drills with the same steadiness she had brought to the first day. Not exceptional, not weak. But the steadiness had something underneath it now that the first day's steadiness had not had. Direction. The steadiness was no longer about survival. It was about being exactly who she was in this yard in front of these people on this specific morning as a deliberate act rather than a defensive one. At 0945, during a brief break between stations, she found Cole Harmon near the obstacle course staging area. "I want to talk to Hollingsworth," she said. Harmon looked at her. "C.I.D. Hollingsworth. You know him?" "I know him. He's been building a file for months. He needs a third document to open a formal investigation." He paused. "He may already be close by." "Call him," she said. "Tell him I have the third piece. I'll be ready by 1400. Harmon nodded. He started to move away. "One more thing," she said. "The formation Pratt called for 1100. Do you know what it is?" "I suggested it to him this morning," Harmon said. I told him I wanted to do a combatives demonstration. He agreed quickly. Sara thought about Pratt in the examination chair, saying, I've been sitting on this for 8 months, and I know what that sounds like. He's been waiting for a direction to move in, she said. Yes, Harmon said. I think that's right. She left him and completed the remaining stations. At 10:50, she went to the barracks and retrieved the folder from under the mattress. She put it in the inside pocket of her training jacket, where it fit exactly. She walked to the training hangar. The formation was already assembling near the main mat. Pratt stood at the front. Harmon stood to one side, deliberately off-center, because this was not his session, and he understood that. The trainees gathered, all 27 of the current cycle. Some of them looked at her when she walked in. Two women she had not yet spoken to were standing near each other with expressions she read as something adjacent to solidarity, which is different from friendship but not less valuable. Dex Mercer stood near the back wall, still alone. Pratt called the session to order and said that Lieutenant Harmon had requested time for a combatives demonstration. A volunteer would work through 3 rounds against trained partners in sequence. Not a competitive exercise, a skills demonstration. Harmon stepped forward. He explained the format. Then he looked at Sara. Quinn, front. She stepped onto the mat. She heard the room shift, that collective breath, that micro-recalibration. But this shift was different from the one that happened when Dex walked into the mess hall on the first morning. That shift had been about power making itself felt. This one had more uncertainty in it. The room was not sure yet what it was watching. Good, she thought. Let it wait. Before she took her position, she stepped to where Harmon stood and held the watch out to him. He looked at it. She said, hold on to this for me until it's done. He took it without asking what done meant. She appreciated that more than she could say. Then she walked to the center of the mat. The first partner was a trainee named Garrett, larger than Sara, and technically proficient, who had the additional quality of not being angry, which meant she could trust his attacks to be what they appeared rather than what they covered for. She worked inside his reach and used his size against his momentum and moved constantly, never stationary, making herself a target that required recalculation rather than force. After the first round, Harmon said, she is not matching him strength for strength. She is changing the terms of every exchange before he can commit to them. He described a principle. She happened to be illustrating it. The distinction mattered. The second partner was faster. A woman named Delcourt, who moved with the quick efficiency of someone trained in kickboxing. This round was harder. Sara absorbed a glancing hit to her left shoulder and let herself feel it and moved on. She found the gap in Delcourt's guard that opened briefly on the third combination when her weight committed forward, and she placed a clean palm strike to the center of Delcourt's sternum. Controlled. Precise. Exactly enough. Delcourt stepped back and nodded once. The third round had no partner yet. Sara stood on the mat and waited and did not look toward the back wall. The silence stretched for a moment, slightly longer than comfortable. Then from the back of the room, the sound of gloves being picked up. The weight shift of someone standing from a position held for too long. Dex Mercer walked toward the mat. He did not look at Harmon. He did not look at Pratt. He looked at Sara and held her gaze and picked up a pair of training gloves from the equipment rack and pulled them on with the focused, deliberate motions of someone following a decision through before they can think better of it. He stopped at the edge of the mat. If you'll have me, he said, directed at Sara, not at Harmon or Pratt, at her. She read what was underneath it. He was not here to attack. He was here because he needed to look at her directly without his father behind him, without Stafford and Briggs on either side, without the architecture of his usual arrangements, holding the world in its expected shape. She stepped back to give him room. He stepped onto the mat. They worked through the round cleanly. The anger that had driven the first encounter was not operating the same way now. He used his size honestly, without the lean toward escalation that had been there before, like something waiting to happen. She read him as she had read the others. She adapted. She was quicker than him, not dramatically, but enough, and she used the quickness to close down moments before they became problems. At 3 minutes, she landed a clean combination that scored 2 clear points. He absorbed them and reset. At 4 minutes, he pressed her toward the corner of the mat, and she slipped sideways out of the press, and his momentum carried him a half step past the edge. He stopped, looked down at his feet, then up at her. He pulled off one glove, then the other. He set them on the mat at his feet and stood in the quiet. The room had gone into that held breath quiet of a space where everyone understood something was happening that was not on the schedule. I went too far, he said. His voice was not loud. It was directed at her, not at the room. Day before yesterday, I know that. It was not a complete accounting. It was not an apology in the full sense. It did not cover everything that needed to be covered. But she had spent 16 months learning the difference between a statement made to manage a situation and one made because something in the person saying it had genuinely shifted. This was the second kind. I know you do, she said. He picked up his gloves. He walked back off the mat and stood near the wall. Not in his usual position, not with Stafford and Briggs, just near the wall, and he watched the rest of the session with the expression of a person who is in the early stages of figuring out who they are when the usual supports are absent. Harmon stepped forward. Quinn is not here because she got lucky, he said to the room. She is here because she earned the right to be here. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That is worth understanding. Pratt blew the whistle. Dismissed to break. The room began to move. People passed near Sara, some closer than necessary, which was a way of saying something without saying it. One of the two women she had noticed earlier passed by and said without stopping quietly, "Nice work, Quinn." Sara did not respond, but she registered it and put it somewhere it would stay. She finished unwrapping her hands and took the folder from her jacket and held it. It was time. At 1340, she walked to the communications building and used the private infirmary line to call a number she had memorized rather than written down because there were some numbers you did not write down. The phone rang twice. Hollingsworth. This is Sara Quinn, she said. I was told you might be in the area. A pause. Not surprised. Ready? I'm in Beatty, 45 minutes out. Another pause. You have something. I have a folder, she said, and a sequence, and a name. Boyd Mercer, Hollingsworth said. She was quiet for a moment. How long have you been working on this? Long enough. I have two pieces. I need a third. A pause. Is what you have the third piece? Well, yeah. She thought about the routing slip, the date 11 months ago, the approval chain, General Boyd Mercer's name and the date and the 4 months that followed. Yes, she said. It's the third piece? I can be there by 15:30. I'll come in as a compliance review, routine. There is one more thing, she said. Quinn. David Wren, she said. He is in the sequence. I do not have hard documentation on his direct connection to this. But the timeline places his death 6 days after he signed a document that Mercer had previously suppressed. I need you to know that going in. I need it on the record that I said it. Hollingsworth was quiet for a moment. It is on the record, he said. I will see you at 15:30. She set the phone down and sat in the small room. The fuel vehicles were visible through the window. She thought about Pratt in the examination chair, about Harmon handing back a watch on a cold evening and not asking unnecessary questions, about David Wren in the break room pouring coffee saying the decent thing in the matter-of-fact way of someone who did not know he was making the last significant decision of his life. She stood. She put the folder back inside her jacket. She went to find Cole Harmon. She found him in the side yard near the vehicle lot, the part of the base least observed from the main buildings. Hollingsworth is coming at 15:30, she said. I'm going to give him the folder and the sequence. Your call, Harmon said. I want you there, not to speak, to be in the room. He understood the distinction immediately. A witness whose presence made a statement about the seriousness of what was occurring. Someone whose name on the account of a meeting carried institutional weight without requiring him to take over. I'll be there, he said. She started to walk away. Quinn, he said. She stopped. He held out the DW watch. She shook her head. Keep it until Hollingsworth leaves the building. He held her gaze. What happens after that? After that, she said, I'll tell you. She walked back toward the training hangar. At 15:28, a dark blue sedan pulled through the camp iron gate. Government issue in the way that civilian government vehicles always manage to look government issue regardless of make or model, something in the particular anonymity of their appearance. A man got out who was tall and angular, with gray at his temples, and the particular bearing of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where information was the operative currency. He signed in at the gate. He showed a compliance review authorization issued that morning from Fort Bragg. He walked through this gate with the unhurried confidence of a man who had been waiting long enough that the difference between 5 more minutes and 5 fewer had ceased to mean anything. James Hollingsworth, Special Agent, Criminal Investigation Division, United States Army. 11 months of building a file, 2 pieces of documentation. In need of a third. Sara was waiting in a room off the operations building that Pratt had made available without asking what the compliance review was reviewing. Harmon stood near the window with his small notebook open to a fresh page. He would not write anything in it unless asked. But it was open, and an open notebook in a room where a CID agent sits down carries a particular quality of intention. She shook Hollingsworth's hand. She sat across from him. She placed the folder on the table between them. "I'll walk you through it," she said. She went through each document in order: the preliminary assessment, the personnel action notice, the routing slip, the approval chain, the date, the relationship between the date and the Carver incident. She used the language she had developed in 16 months of analytical work, which was precise and complete, and did not editorialize, because editorializing was what you did when you did not trust the evidence to speak clearly enough on its own. She trusted this evidence. Hollingsworth listened without interrupting. He read the documents she passed him, carefully taking the time they required, and set each one on the table in front of him in a row as he finished, the way a person lays out cards when they are looking for a pattern. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at the row. "The routing slip," he said. "You understand what this establishes?" "Prior knowledge," she said, "and a subsequent pattern of document restriction and accelerated closure that follows from that knowledge." Hollingsworth picked up the routing slip and held it at the angle that showed the date clearly. 11 months ago. "Yes." "And 4 months later." "Carver," she said. "Yes." He set it down. He looked at Harmon briefly, which was an acknowledgement rather than a question. Harmon held the look and said nothing. Hollingsworth looked back at Sara. "I am going to take possession of this folder as evidence," he said. "I will need a formal statement from you. Now or at Fort Bragg within 72 hours. "Now," she said. He placed a recording device on the table and activated it. He stated the date, the time, the location, the names of those present. He looked at her and said, "Ready when you are, Miss Quinn." She took a breath. She thought of David Wren's sister pressing the watch into her hands at the memorial and not explaining why. She thought of Pratt in the examination chair saying, "I know what it cost." She thought of the transfer order folded twice in her pocket on the morning she walked through the gate. She thought of DW scratched into the back of a watch case with something improvised by hands she would never see again. She looked at the recording device. She began to speak. She gave her statement for 40 minutes. She answered Hollingsworth's follow-up questions carefully and completely. She watched him place the folder into an evidence bag and sign and date the seal, and hand her the receipt with the care a person uses when handling something they understand cannot be replaced. Before he left, Hollingsworth looked at her and said, "People like Mercer count on the distance between what happened and what can be proven. You just close that distance considerably." He paused. "I cannot promise you an outcome. What I can tell you is that formal investigations of this nature, once opened, are very difficult to close without a full accounting." He left the building at 1712. Sara was sitting on a low concrete step outside the operations building, facing the training yard, when her phone rang. The day had gone through its afternoon colors and was moving toward the long Nevada dusk that turned everything a particular shade of amber. She answered. The voice on the other end was a voice she had not heard before but recognized immediately in type. The voice of a man accustomed to being the largest force in any communication he initiated. Measured, unhurried, operating from the assumption that the architecture of the conversation was his to determine. "Ms. Quinn," the voice said, "my name is Boyd Mercer. I believe you've had a productive afternoon. I wanted to reach out directly." A pause calibrated to feel like openness rather than hesitation. "I think there may be a path forward that serves everyone's interests, including a reassignment to Washington that would represent a meaningful step for your career." The yard was quiet in front of her, amber light on the obstacles and the track and the flat ground between the buildings. She said, "Did you know about David Wren?" Silence. 1 second, 2, 3. 3 seconds of silence from a man who did not deal in silence casually. 3 seconds from a man who had spent 30 years never being caught without an answer prepared. 3 seconds was not long in ordinary time. In the time of a person who controlled the speed of every conversation he entered, 3 seconds was a confession. "I'm not sure I understand the reference," Mercer said. She did not explain, she did not argue. She had what she needed from those 3 seconds, and she understood that he understood she had it, and she understood that he understood the folder was already in an evidence bag with Hollingsworth's signature on the seal. She ended the call. She sat on the step and thought about Mercer, standing now wherever he was standing, realizing that the mechanism he had always relied on was no longer between him and the thing he had done. That Hollingsworth was 45 minutes down the road with a sealed evidence bag, and a signed receipt, and a statement on record from a woman he had tried to make disappear into the Nevada desert. The machinery was moving. It moved slowly. It always moved slowly. It was heavier than any individual person, and it moved in one direction, and Boyd Mercer was standing in its path. The consequences would come in the measured, deliberate language of institutional process of formal investigations and authorization chains, examined and questioned, and documented of a routing slip with a date on it that no amount of administrative language could make mean something other than what it meant. That was going to have to be enough for tonight. Cole Harmon appeared from the direction of the vehicle lot. He stopped when he was close enough to speak without raising his voice. He looked at her and the phone in her hand and her face, which she made no effort to arrange. He held out the watch. Hollingsworth left the building about 8 minutes ago, he said. She took it. She turned it in her hands and looked at DW in the amber light. He called me, she said. Mercer. He offered a career opportunity in Washington. Harmon said nothing. I asked him if he knew about David Wren. And 3 seconds of silence. Harmon sat down on the step beside her. Not close, a respectful distance, just present. She had noticed that he was good at being present in a way that did not ask anything of the room. They sat in the amber light with the sound of the bass doing its evening things around them. What happens to Dex, she said. Harmon thought about this. His father is going to face a formal investigation. When that becomes visible, Dex loses the thing that has been structuring his world since he was old enough to know it was there. He paused. That is going to be difficult for him in ways he does not have vocabulary for yet. Sara thought about Dex in the mess hall that morning alone at a table near the door, with the posture of a person whose usual arrangement has been subtracted and who is discovering what they are in its absence. He will have to figure out who he is, she said. Yes. That is not the worst thing, she said, having to figure it out. She held the watch and looked at the initials and thought about a 31-year-old man in a break room pouring coffee and making a choice without knowing it would be the last significant one he made. She had been carrying the weight of that moment as debt for 8 months. She had carried it because debt required proximity to the place where it was incurred. She had not known another way to hold it. She understood now, sitting on a concrete step in the Nevada evening, that the weight did not change. It would not change. She would carry it for a long time, possibly always the way you carry the specific gravity of the choices that redirected everything. But she could carry it as something other than what she owed. She could carry it as what she had done. She put the watch on her right wrist, not the left where the alarm watch was, the right. She clasped the cracked leather strap at the middle hole and felt it settle against her skin and turned her wrist over and looked at it. It looked like it had always been there. That evening, Wade Pratt sat in his office after everyone else had gone to dinner. He opened the locked drawer at the bottom of his desk. There was one document left in it, not the folder which was in Hollingsworth's evidence bag. This was something he had written himself. A personal record, handwritten, a running account of the things he had seen and not reported. Not because he had been complicit, not because he had agreed with what he witnessed, because he had learned years ago at a different installation that the cost of speaking could be total, and he had not been ready to pay it again. He read through what he had written. He took his time with it. Then he took it to the small metal wastebasket beside his desk and held his lighter to the corner of the first page and watched it catch. He set it in the wastebasket and watched it burn. He was not destroying evidence. Hollingsworth had the evidence. The folder was sealed and signed and moving through the machinery that would do with it what needed to be done. This document was something else entirely. It was the record of his own silence, kept to prove to himself that the silence had not been nothing that he had been watching, even when he had not been acting, that somewhere behind the neutrality, there had always been a person who knew what was happening and was ashamed of knowing without moving. He did not need the record anymore. The record was in his statement to Hollingsworth, which he had given at 16:15, after Sara had finished hers quietly and completely, with everything he had earned and everything he had stayed silent about, standing behind every word. He watched the paper turn to ash. He turned off the light in his office and went to dinner. The next morning, Sara was on the track at 05:50. Not because the schedule required it. The schedule did not start until 07:30. She was there because she had woken at 5:20 and lain in the dark for 10 minutes and then gotten up because there was a particular kind of energy that followed the resolution of something long carried, and it needed somewhere to go. She ran. She ran in the Nevada dark, in the cold, that had its own specific quality at this hour, a cold with clarity in it rather than hostility. The base was quiet around her. The sky above the ridge was beginning to show the first gray edge of morning at its eastern seam. She ran at a pace she could hold for a long time, not proving anything, just moving through the cold air, with the DW watch on her right wrist and the receipt for the folder in her room, and the particular quality of a person who has set something down after carrying it a long distance. She was on her fourth lap when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not slow down. The footsteps found her pace and held it. She did not need to look to know who it was. She had learned his footfall from days of proximity, the way you learn any sound that appears reliably in your environment. Dex Mercer ran beside her for one full lap without speaking. The sky was getting lighter. The ridge was going from black to dark gray, and there was a color at the horizon that was not quite pink and not quite gold, but something the desert produces in those specific minutes before full morning that has no name in any language she knew. "I'm going back to Washington," he said. He said it at a pace that matched the running, not labored, but not easy. "After this cycle, I put in for a transfer this morning." Sara ran. "My father's office called me last night," he said. "They wanted to manage the narrative. Those were the words they used." Astride. "I told them I was not available." She looked at him sideways briefly without breaking pace. "That is the first time," he said, "that I have said that." She looked ahead at the track. "I know," she said. They ran in silence for a while. The cold was absolute and clean. Her watch tapped lightly against her wrist with each stride. DW, DW, DW in the silent language of impact and release. "What you said on the mat," Dex said. "I know you do. You didn't say I forgive you. You didn't say it's fine. You just said I know you do." "That's what was true," she said. He was quiet for a full stride. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." They finished the lap. At the far end of the track where the obstacle course began, Dex peeled off toward the barracks without ceremony, without a long exit, just a short nod in her direction, and then he was gone. Sara kept running. By the time the base fully woke and the mess hall filled, and the 0730 formation assembled in the yard, the Nevada morning had completed its decision and come out in favor of a pale, clear blue that stretched to every ridge without interruption. Sara stood in formation with her uniform pressed by hand and her hair in a tight bun, and the DW watch on her right wrist and Hollingsworth's receipt in her breast pocket. Pratt walked out at 0730. He stopped in front of the formation and looked along the line, and when his eyes reached Sara, they stayed for the usual half-second, and she returned the look with the same steadiness she had brought to every formation since the first one. He gave the day's schedule, the objectives, the standards. He did not say anything about Hollingsworth. He did not say anything about the folder or the routing slip or the approval chain with Boyd Mercer's name on it. Those things were in motion. They would move at the speed of institutions, which was slower than any individual preferred and faster than anyone with something to hide wanted. The wheels of a formal military investigation once engaged by a CID agent with a sealed evidence bag and a signed chain of custody did not reverse. They did not pause for telephone calls from a general's office. They did not respond to the language of career opportunities and managed narratives. They moved in the direction they were pointed with the weight of every document and every statement and every recorded 3-second silence behind them. Boyd Mercer would understand this soon if he did not already. Pratt blew the whistle. The formation broke into the morning's first station, and the base filled with the sound of work, and the clean Nevada air moved across the yard, and Sara Quinn ran where she was told to run, and climbed what she was told to climb, and carried what she was told to carry. She did all of it with the steady, unremarkable excellence of a person who knows exactly why she is somewhere and intends to remain exactly there for as long as it takes. She was not finished here. She had not come to Camp Iron to be finished quickly. She had come because a man named David Wren had stood at a coffee machine on an ordinary Tuesday morning and said the decent thing in the matter-of-fact voice of someone who did not know he was making the last significant choice of his life. He had not done it for recognition. He had not done it because he understood the full weight of the moment. He had done it because it was the right thing, and the right thing was available to him, and he had reached for it without hesitation. That was going to count. She was going to make sure it counted. The track was cold and solid under her boots. The sky above the Nevada ridge was the clearest blue she had seen since arriving. Sara Quinn ran, and the DW watch kept time on her right wrist, and somewhere 45 minutes down the road in a car, with a sealed evidence bag in the back seat and a recording device with 40 minutes of statement on it, the machinery was moving in the only direction it knew. Forward.